All right, thank you for those of you who are joining us via the internet. We're going to do the second half of 1 Corinthians chapter 7 today and chapter 8. I will say it probably 2 or 3 times during the message because it's not obvious to you unless I tell you. Much of what Paul is saying in this letter are answers to questions that were written to him by the church in Corinth. So they sent Paul a letter with this list of questions. So as Paul's going through, he's answering those questions. Now, I don't have a copy of the letter that they sent to Paul, but I know he's answering their questions from that letter. So, verse 17, he's going to give us an overarching principle. Now, Pastor Terry last week talked about people who found themselves in different situations, those who've been divorced, those who've been widowed. But the overarching principle is however God found you, be there. Don't try to change it. Be who you are. Be who God called you. So, verse 17. But as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord had called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. So no matter what situation you're in, married, single, divorced, widowed, remarried, whatever, God can work in your life. Now we often think, gee, if I could just make a change, I could serve God better. No, serve God right where you are. God doesn't expect you to go back into the past to try to correct something. He expects you to right where you are, serve him with all your heart, all your strength, all your being. So this is a warning about trying to undo the past in regards to relationships. You can't go back and fix what's happened in the past. Move forward. Serve God right where you are. It says, so let him walk. Now, this is also a warning to beware the danger of thinking other people have it better than you do because they're in a different situation in life. Every one of us has a unique situation. God loves each one of us just the way we are. Now, I've told you before, there's not a single thing you could do today to make God love you more than he loves you right now. I can't get another ounce of love out of God. God is love. God loves me completely, just like I am. Now, just like you, I get problems. Ask my wife, she'll tell you, I have problems. We all do. But God loves us just like we are. I'm so tired of churches that beat people up to be something they're not. Just be the best you can be. Now, he's going to give a couple of examples of this being just like you are, being just like God called you. Now, the first one is a very Jewish example. It's circumcision. So he says in verses 18 through 20, was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. But keep the commandments of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Now, Paul's audience is part Jewish, is part Gentile. There were folks in his audience that were circumcised. There were folks in his audience who weren't. And he says, whatever situation you were in when God called you, be that. Don't try to make a change. Don't try to become Jewish. Don't try to become un-Jewish. Just be the best Christian you can make. He says, circumcision or uncircumcision, either way is nothing. What matters is loving God and serving him. We sometimes get so caught up in the externals that we miss the internals. It's the internals that God cares about. He's now going to give an example from slavery. Now remember, slavery was a very common practice in those days. Slavery is not what you would think of when you hear the word slavery. It was much more a indentured servant type of slavery than slaves from Africa, slaves working on a plantation down south. There were slaves that were doctors and lawyers and teachers. It didn't mean that you were a poor person who just did menial labor. It means you were indentured to somebody. So, were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who was called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who was called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. Again, he's saying to you, be happy where you are and serve God where you are. Don't try to change. So, if you were called as a slave, serve God as a slave. He says, by the way, if you have a chance to buy your freedom, and that's how you get out of being a slave, is you earned enough money to pay for your freedom. If you can get free, that's okay. Go ahead and do that. But he says, just make your life count for God, whether you're a slave or a free person. By the way, a slave, even though he belongs to someone else, has everything God offers. There's nothing that's kept from him just because he's a slave. So he just said, be content as a slave. If you're a free man, consider yourself God's slave. But whatever your situation is in, make the best of it. Verse 22, for he who is called, the man who being a slave is converted to the Christian faith, God considers him a free man in his sight. Now he may still have an earthly master, but he's considered free in God's sight. His condition as a slave doesn't change any of the privileges which he's entitled to as a Christian. Now, conversely, let's say you're a person who's not a slave. You're a free person. You should consider yourself God's slave. We all have a boss. People think, I can't wait till I retire so I don't have a boss. Folks, we're always going to have a boss. Brother Walter, if you got a boss,
you bet.
And you do just what she tells you.
And also what he tells me.
Amen. So Walter's got a couple of bosses. We all work for somebody. None of us is free to make our own decisions. That's a fallacy. Get that out of your head. Doesn't work that way. We all have a boss. God is my boss, and I need to serve him. All right, verse 23. But do not become slaves of men. Now, this is true not only in literal slavery, but also in spiritual slavery. We are never to put ourselves under the inappropriate control or influence of others. There are folks following guys around who they think are gurus and have all the answers. Don't do that. Nobody has all the answers but God. Your pastor does not have all the answers. Your associate pastor does not have all the answers. God has all the answers. All right. Verse 24, he sums it up again. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that calling in which he was called. So he's got this broad principle: married, unmarried, circumcised, uncircumcised, slave or free, no matter what your situation, serve God. Love God. Put him first. By the way, there is no earthly situation that should keep you from serving God. A spouse shouldn't keep you from serving God. A job shouldn't keep you from serving God. A controlling boss shouldn't keep you from serving God. We should always be serving God. Now, next thing he's going to answer is he's going to answer questions about marriage. Now, remember, Pastor Terry touched on this last week. I'm going to touch on it some more. Verses 25 through 28. Paul's going to give advice. He's going to say marriage isn't bad in the sight of God. but he's going to tell you that singleness has its advantages. Now, you got to remember, I got to get this in context. So when you hear Paul speaking, you understand what he's saying and why. Paul was in the early church. The early church thought Jesus is coming back tomorrow. They were expecting the Lord's return in their lifetime. Now you're going to notice as you read all of the letters of Paul, as you get towards the end letters, he's still expecting Jesus to return. He isn't expecting Jesus to return tomorrow. He's got it a little bit better towards the end of his ministry. But as he's writing right now, he's expecting Jesus to return like any day, literally. So the decisions he's telling you to make, the lifestyle he's telling you to live, based on, hey, Jesus could be here tomorrow. Now, by the way, that's true. Jesus could be here tomorrow. I'm closer to Jesus coming back than any Christian has ever been. Think about it. I got thousands of years out of the way. By the way, there were some things that had to happen before Jesus could come back. If you study prophecy, if you study the Bible, Jesus couldn't come back till Israel was back in the land. That happened in 1946. 1946 was a very good year. It was the year I was born. So, if you've been saying Jesus is coming back tomorrow, prior to 1946, your theology was a little messy. But Israel's back in the land. There's nothing left to happen. There's no promise left to be fulfilled. Jesus could come back before I finish the message. That's okay, Lord. Come, Lord Jesus. But he's coming back. But in Paul's day, the coming back wasn't as close as it is now. But that's what Paul thought. So understand his mindset as he writes this. Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. I suppose, therefore, that this is good because of the present distress. So there's particular things happening in Paul's day that's influencing what he says. That it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loose from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh. But I would spare you. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Apostle Paul. Let me talk about where he's coming from. Told you, first of all, he's coming from the fact that he thought Jesus was coming like tomorrow. Paul, before he was converted, was a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. So there were a couple of rules and regulations to be a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. That was the ruling body spiritually of Israel, not politically. The Romans were the political rulers, but the spiritual rulers were the Sanhedrin. All right. To be in the Sanhedrin, you had to be 33 years old, and you had to be married. So, as Paul talks about this, Paul is a man who has been married. We don't suspect he was married at this time. The Bible doesn't tell me. His wife may have died, and Paul may be a widower. Or when Paul got converted, she thought this guy's gone off the deep end. He's cuckoo, and I'm out of here. I don't know that. Scripture is silent on that. So I'm not going to tell you what Scripture doesn't tell you. But I know at one time, Paul was married. So he's speaking from the experience and the background of a guy who'd had a wife. Okay? Just understand that. All right. So he starts off in verse 25 concerning virgins. Now, when Paul uses that word, you got to be careful because it's used a couple of ways. In this case, it's talking about an unmarried person, whether male or female. So you can always look at the context. So this is just any unmarried person. Paul says, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment. Now, this doesn't mean that this writing isn't inspired. Doesn't mean that it isn't God-breathed. It means Paul understood that what he was dealing with are real life situations, and everybody's real life situation is going to be different. So what Paul's going to give you is a principle. He's not going to give you a rule. Principles are always better than rules. All right? So he says, it is good for a man to remain as he is. Paul recommends that he remains as he is, either single or married, but that he doesn't make a change because of the present distress. Now, I know generically what the present distresses were. I don't know the specific instance Paul was dealing with in Corinth. But remember the political situation. These guys were all controlled by Rome. Nero was getting ready to be the ruler of Rome. Nero was the guy who in his life would persecute Christians, burn them at the stake, feed them to the lions. Nero was coming into authority. So there were things on the horizon. I don't know what details Paul knew, but he knew times were going to get tough. And it would be easier to not have somebody else to worry about if times were tough. Verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. Now, same principle he gave back in verses 17 through 24. Now, a couple of words you want to underline. Bound and loosed. You don't hear Paul use those words very often. That is the vocabulary of the Jewish Sanhedrin. It was the vocabulary of the Jewish scribes. Now remember, there were priests, but the scribes were the guy who interpreted to you what the law said. So remember, God gave 10 commandments. Jewish Ministerial Association came up with several hundred regulations out of those 10 commandments. So when you didn't know how a regulation applied to you, you went to the scribe and said, here's my situation, here's what the teaching is, what do I do? And they would use these words. You are bound to that law. You have to obey it. Or you are loosed. Does it apply to your situation? So he's using words that the scribes would have used, that the religious leaders would have used. He then goes on in verse 28 and says, if you do marry, you have not sinned. Paul never forbids marriage. Yet he tells those who get married, nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. Now, if we're honest, no marriage runs smoothly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are problems. There are contentions. There are differences of opinion. Like my wife likes the room 20 degrees colder than I like it. Now, she's not wrong, but she's close to it. I mean, we have a difference of opinion. She likes a cold room, I like a warm room. There's lots of that stuff goes on in marriage. By the way, if I have to be someplace and I'm not 30 minutes early, I'm late. I was brought up that way. I was wired that way. My dad was a fanatic about being early. Now, when I grew up, cars were not as reliable as they are now. Your car broke down going someplace on a fairly regular basis. So my dad always left time to change a tire, to fix a leaky radiator hose, whatever. But his goal was to be there 30 minutes early, just in case he had to fix something. So that was how I was brought up. My wife thinks showing up 10 minutes after the start is pretty close to being on time. So that causes us friction some Sunday mornings as we're leaving the house. Marriage doesn't run smooth. It's a series of give and takes. It's a series of compromises. You can't have your own way all the time. Did you get that, married people? You can't have your own way all the time. Give and take. That does not mean she gives and you take. It means both parties give. Folks want to tell me that marriage is 50-50. Marriage is not 50-50. A 50-50 marriage is doomed for failure. Marriage is 100%, 100%. Each person giving to the other all the time. And never do you get to say, it's my turn. I was nice to you yesterday. You know, we give all the time. That's what we're supposed to do. So, all Paul's telling them, if you get married, there's going to be complications in your life. It's going to be harder to serve Jesus because now you're not just getting one of you there, you're getting two of you there. Or if you get kids, you're getting four of you there. It takes more work to get four people someplace than it takes to get one person someplace. Doesn't it, Melissa? Takes lots more work. That's what Paul's saying. He's not downing marriage. He's not against marriage. He's just saying going to be problems. Now, in the next verses 29 through 31, Paul's going to warn us against putting our roots down too deep in a world that's passing away. Remember, we're supposed to be a pilgrim. We are passing through. We are strangers. We are aliens. We're not supposed to get too comfortable here. Oh, everything belongs to God. The minute stuff starts to belong to you, you're in trouble. I don't own a house. I don't own a car. God has a house He lets me live in. God has a couple of cars He lets me drive. I'm concerned because one of God's vehicles is rusting. I'm hoping He'll take care of it. But we don't want to hold stuff too close, too tight, because it isn't our stuff. I am a caretaker. You are a caretaker. It all belongs to Him. Got that?
Yes.
All God's stuff. All right, here's our verses. But this I say, brother, the time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Those who weep, as though they did not weep. Those who rejoice, as though they did not rejoice. Those who buy, as though they did not possess. And those who use this world as not misusing it. For the form of this world is passing away. Now again, remember Paul's reference, remember Paul's time frame. Jesus is coming tomorrow. Everything Paul just said is based on his belief. Jesus is coming tomorrow. I haven't got time for all this other stuff. I got to be busy about the gospel. That was his motivation. So, when Paul says in verse 29, the time is short, he thought it was really short. It was imminent. Now, we're still supposed to be ready. We're still supposed to believe Jesus could come any day, and He could. But it's been a while. We get busy with other stuff. We got to keep this right balance between living and Jesus could be here at any moment. Jesus told us in Matthew 24, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour that you do not expect. I don't know what days Jesus is coming, but I know when it happens, it's going to be a surprise. I'm not going to be expecting it. I'm not going to be standing there looking out the window waiting for it. I'm going to be caught off guard. You're going to be caught off guard. So I ought to be living all the time like if Jesus caught me this very moment, I wouldn't be embarrassed. All right. So, time is short. We should be working for the Master. That's still true today. Now, he then says, and you got to explain what Paul says, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Now, Paul is not encouraging neglect of proper family duties. He's not saying, husbands, it's all right to ignore your wife if you're all busy with the gospel. He's not saying, wives, it's okay to ignore your husband if you're busy at church. He's saying, be ready for Jesus. Be expecting Jesus. Live with an eye to eternity. Paul never expected a husband to ignore his wife. Paul never expected for a wife to ignore her husband. By the way, the best marriages in the whole world ought to happen between Christians. Because we ought to have the ability to say on a regular basis, I'm going to give you the 3 words that will save any marriage. Are you ready? 3 words will save any marriage. I am sorry. Got it? I am sorry. Not the words, but it was your fault. That doesn't cut it. I am sorry. That's what we need to do. And then he says, for the form of this world is passing away. Paul wants us to adopt a time is short attitude. That's how we ought to be living. Time is short. We ought to be making decisions based on what does God want me to do? What does God want me to accomplish? What's on my to-do list for Jesus? Not what's on my bucket list for me. My Jesus to-do list ought to trump the bucket list. All right. Now, he's going to talk in verses 32 through 35 about how unmarried people have an opportunity to serve with less distraction. Do not go home and tell your spouse they're a distraction. Will not win you points. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I have put a leash on you, but for what is proper, that you may serve the Lord without distraction. So again, his whole thing here is being unencumbered to serve Jesus. So verse 32, he who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord. I mean, that kind of makes sense. He has no other cares or responsibilities. I can remember a young college student living with us for a summer. He did a summer internship at our church. He lived with us for the summer, and he spent every single minute serving the Lord until his last month with us. His last month with us, he got smitten by a lady in the church. They went on to get married, have a beautiful Christian family, is a wonderful Christian couple, but he got interested in taking care of this beautiful young lady and didn't do as much for the Lord because there's only 24 hours in a day. Now, was that wrong? Absolutely not. It's just a difference when there's somebody in your life versus when there's not somebody. That's all Paul's saying. Paul is not against marriage. Paul is not an unhappy guy who doesn't ever want anybody to be married. He's just saying, understand it affects your priorities. Verses 33 and 34. He who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife, and the wife cares about how she may please her husband. That's how married couples are supposed to be. Husband is supposed to be pleasing the wife. Wife is supposed to be pleasing the husband. That's not wrong. That's not bad. Paul's just saying, understand that's what happens. You're not going to have all your time unencumbered. You're going to have responsibilities. I remember Pastor Chuck Smith in one of his sermons talking about he used to drive from one end of California to the other to preach on weekends. He said, now when I was a single guy, I'd pack a tuna sandwich, I'd take a couple of drinks in a cooler, and I'd drive 12 hours. So I get married, I had to stop every 3 hours. Every 3 hours, my wife would want a potty break and a snack. He said, it no longer took 12 hours to make the drive, it took 15 hours. He said, 12 hours single, 15 hours married. That's a real thing. It's okay, it's reality. But just understand that it's reality. Now, verse 35 is the dog lovers, Miss Elizabeth. Not that I want to put a leash on you. He's not trying to control you. He's not trying to give rules and regulations. He's just saying, hey, understand that if there's another person in your life, it's going to take time. You're going to have to do things for them. You're going to have to be around them. Now, various churches have taken this teaching to extremes. Extremes are always bad. Truth is never found at the extremes. So the Catholic Church has gone to the extreme that says priests can't get married. There are Protestant denominations that say don't have anybody for a minister unless they're married. So I've got people on both ends of the extreme. I have the Apostle Paul kind of in the middle. In the middle is where you always want to be. All right. Now, verses 36 through 38 is going to sound like he's dealing with the same thing again, but he's not. So let me give you the secret decoder ring, the verses 36 through 38 before I read them. Paul is giving instructions to the father of an unmarried child. Got it? So don't read anything into it other than that. You got to know the context. Otherwise, you're going to read these verses and misuse them. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin, okay, unmarried daughter, if she is past the flower of the youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has the power over his own will, and is so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, not let his child marry, does well. So that he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her marriage does better. Paul is trying to give advice to the dad who can't decide, am I supposed to have my kid married or not? Now remember, in Paul's day, young people didn't make the decision to get married. Didn't happen. Two dads got together, struck an agreement. Money changed hands, and an engagement happened. The fathers made the deal. Okay. After the mothers told them what to do. Fathers made the deal. So, this is advice to a dad. If you want to have your kid married, it's okay. If you, for conscience sake, don't want to have your kid married, that's okay. Now, it wasn't the kid's decision in that culture. It was the parents' decision. That's all he's talking about. He's giving advice to dads what to do about their unmarried kids. And basically he says, either way, it's okay. Again, Paul thinks it's better to be unmarried because he thinks Jesus is coming tomorrow and you have a good time to get married. That's what he's thinking. He's not against marriage. He's not saying marriage is wrong. He's not saying God didn't ordain marriage. He's saying, hey, because I know Jesus is coming tomorrow, you have a good time to fool with this nonsense. But, so you got to read it from where he's coming from. All right, makes sense? All right. 39 through 40. Now he's going to talk about widows. Gals who used to be married. Why do we talk about widows and not widowers? Because most men died young because they worked to death. That's reality. All right? So, a wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives. But if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes. Now get his next words. Only in the Lord. Let me translate this for you. If your husband dies and you want to remarry, it's okay. You got to marry a Christian. Christians should always marry Christians. If you have a Christian and an unchristian married, that's what the Bible talks about as being unequally yoked. Doesn't work. Bad stuff, don't do it. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment. And I think I also have the Spirit of God. Remember, what's Paul's reference point? Jesus is coming tomorrow. You have a good time to have another relationship. That's Paul's reference. Not that remarriage is wrong, not that it's bad, not that God doesn't want you to do it. Jesus is coming tomorrow, you have a good time for it. That's Paul's reference. So understand what Paul is saying and why. That makes sense? We got that? I want to make sure we got that before I move on. All right. That's the end of chapter 7 that Pastor Terry started last week. Chapter 8 is short. I'm going to whiz through chapter 8. If I was to take the whole chapter and sum it up into a sentence, it's whether you live by knowledge or by love. So Paul's going to talk about the love principle. Remember, he's answering questions that were sent to him in a letter. So as he goes on to this stuff, he isn't just pulling out of thin air. He's got a letter. There's questions in it. He's walking his way down through the questions. So the next question was about idols and food offered to idols. Now, concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up. Does that sound good? No. Puffed up is not good.
Oh, no.
But love edifies. And if anyone thinks he knows anything, he knows nothing, yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. Him is God. All right. So, having dealt with the questions about marriage, Paul's now going to move on to questions about meat sacrificed to idols. Now, we're going to have some background. The meat offered on pagan altars was usually divided into 3 parts or 3 portions. One portion was burnt in honor to the god. One portion was given to the worshiper to take home and eat. And the third portion was given to the priest. Now, if the priest did 100 sacrifices in a day, and he had 1/3 of the meat from 100 sacrifices, can he eat that much meat in a day? No. So, what did he do? He took it and sold it at the temple meat market. By the way, the meat at the temple meat market was half the price of the meat at the supermarket. Now, Christians today are cheap. Christians in Paul's day were cheap, and they were looking for a bargain. Well, steak is $3 a pound at the supermarket. Steak is $1.50 a pound at the temple meat market. Where do you suppose folks wanted to make a beeline? There was this long line outside the temple meat market because it cost less. By the way, the priest still went home with plenty of money. So that's the whole deal about buying this meat. Now, the problem was lots of these people Paul are writing to that are now Christians used to be idol worshippers. They used to believe that that stupid little metal statue was real and had power, and that they were making a sacrifice to that stupid little statue. Now, if you were never an idol worshiper, if that wasn't stuck in your head, if that didn't bother your conscience, man, if there was a temple meat market next door and hot dogs were half price there, that's where I buy my hot dogs. Tell you, wouldn't bother me one bit. But what if you used to be an idol worshiper? Well, that meat's got a different meaning to you than it does to the guy who was never an idol worshiper. Now you get invited to somebody's house who was never an idol worshiper, but you were. And the guy brings out the meat and says, I got this good cut of meat at the idol's meat market. Boy, if you used to be an idol worshiper, now you got a problem. To eat that is going to violate your conscience. You don't want to hurt your guests, your host's feelings, but it's going to offend your conscience. That's the whole story Paul is talking about here. He's talking about not offending somebody's conscience. Now, you think it's okay to eat meat, and you're right, it is okay to eat that meat. But for the idol worshiper, it's a whole different message. And he comes to your house and you serve it to him and he eats it begrudgingly, and he feels like he's violated himself, like he's violated God. He's now partaken in idol worship again. Doesn't mean that to you, but it does to him. That's the whole story Paul's talking about. The whole chapter is about not offending the conscience. Now, Paul's going to use the word weaker. It isn't he's weak in this, that he lacks strength. It's that he doesn't have the understanding you have. He hasn't come to that point yet. He's got a different background than you do. He's carrying a different set of baggage. We all carry baggage, right? Baggage is real. Baggage affects us. Baggage affects us our whole lives. Your parents did stuff to you that you will carry with you the rest of your life and maybe have a negative impact on you. You learn bad habits as a kid that you still got. We all got this stuff, right? So, and Paul's talking real world stuff here. But I want you to understand where he's coming from. All he's concerned about is not offending somebody. That's my job as a Christian. I'm not supposed to be offensive. I'm especially not supposed to be offensive on purpose. I mean, I'm a guy, dumb things come out of my mouth. If I haven't hurt your feelings yet, I will. Don't mean to, I'm just dumb. But he's talking about stuff that's on purpose. All right. So, let's explain the verses. Verse 1. We know that we all have knowledge. So instead of talking about the food, Paul's going to talk about the principles. Principle is going to be knowledge and love. Christian behavior should be based on love, not on knowledge. The goal of the Christian life is love, not knowledge. He goes and he tells us that knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. So we got to always be looking at, am I dealing with knowledge? Am I dealing with love? The difference between puffs up and edifies is striking. It's like the difference between a bubble and a building. Some Christians grow, others just swell up. Let me do that again. Some Christians grow, others just swell up with pride. There it is. That's what Paul's talking about. He says, if anyone thinks he knows something, he doesn't. And then he says, but if anyone loves God, that person is known by God. That's the goal. We want to be known by God. So now he's going to explain this whole idol thing. Verses 4 through 6. Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, small g, whether in heaven or on earth, is there are many gods, small g, and many lords, small l. Yet for us, Christians, believers, there is one God the Father, of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we are all things, and through whom we live. All right, we know that an idol is nothing. There is no God but one. By the way, if you're a Wednesday Bible study student, Isaiah said the same thing in our lesson last week. Idols are nothing, there's one God. Now, let's say that the meat was offered to the god Zeus. There is no Zeus. He's a myth. He's made up. There's only God. Now, all these images were representations of supposed deities. They basically are figments of people's imagination. They are not real. They have no power. They don't talk. They don't walk. They don't think. They don't know. They're dumb statues. They're telephone poles somebody carved in to looking like something. Kind of like you make bears. Do your bears talk? Do your bears do tricks? Neither did these idols. They're just pieces of wood. So it says there's all kinds of so-called gods, but there's only one real God. So this is the viewpoint from where the Christian's coming from. We know that it's nothing but a dumb piece of wood. We know it's not God. It has no power. You can't worship it. You can't pray to it. It's just a piece of wood or stone. We know that. Good for us. Not everybody has that understanding. Verse 7. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge. For some with consciousness of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So Paul's saying, hey, look, half of you guys used to be Jewish, and you get saved, and you came to believe in the Messiah, and you got this God thing straight, and you know an idol's nothing but a dumb piece of wood. Half of you guys are not Jewish, and used to worship idols, and used to believe idols were real. He says, you guys got some baggage. It's real baggage. It's stuck in their heads. It's programmed there. You get them to eat a piece of meat that was offered to an idol, and in their head, they're right back to worshiping the idol. It's baggage, but it's real. For some reason, we want to pretend everybody's baggage except ours isn't real. Everybody's baggage is real. These guys had real baggage, and Paul's saying, you need to consider what your brother's going through. He's your brother. You don't want to make him stumble. You don't want to hurt him. You don't want to damage him. Knock off this meat thing. All right? So, some folks got it straight, some didn't. So Paul asked the Corinthian Christians, who know that there is nothing to an idol, to remember that not everybody knows that. Not everybody was brought up that way. You got brothers and sisters in Christ now who've come from a different background. No problem to you, huge problem to them. Okay, now, why does he describe their conscience as weak? Not because the conscience doesn't work. In fact, if anything, their conscience is working overtime. They're weak because it is wrongly informed. Their conscience is operating on the idea that there is really something to the idol. That's been programmed into them. You don't make them want to go back there. By the way, you take a guy who used to be an alcoholic sitting in the bar every night. And the guy gets saved. And he gets sober. And he now hates liquor. But it's Saturday night. I think I'll go down to the bar and just listen to the music. Doesn't work. He walks in the door, he smells the alcohol, and the next thing you know, he's drinking. Because it all came back to him. That's the same thing that would happen to this person who used to worship the idol. It would all come back to him. That's what Paul's keeping him away from. Don't do that to your brother. Please don't take a guy who used to be an alcoholic and say, let's go sit at the bar, we'll drink Diet Coke, and just listen to the music. He can't do it. The smell, the atmosphere, it's all going to make him want to drink. Don't do it. Okay? Sometimes you just got to change your lifestyle and get out of someplace. All right. So, we got these Corinthian Christians. They know the truth. They're kind of puffed up with their superior knowledge. And they're kind of looking down their nose at these weaker brothers who can't get it straight. Paul's trying to smack him in the back of the head and get him to straighten out. All right. Verse 8. Whether we eat or don't eat doesn't make us more spiritual. Newsflash. But food does not commend us to God. For neither if we eat are we better, nor if we do not eat are we worse. Food doesn't change us. Okay? What goes into a man comes out of a man. That's not what defiles him. What defiles him happens in his heart and his mind. So, this is the very point where Christians stumble over stuff. This is where churches get legalistic. Okay. What is a legalistic church? It's going to tell you what you can wear to church. It's going to tell you what your haircut ought to be like. In many cases, it's going to tell you what version of the Bible you're allowed to bring to church. It's legalism. It's rules and regulations. I don't have any rules and regulations. I got do what God told you. I got all I can handle with that. Now, you say, well, if I just had a few rules. Adam and Eve had one rule. Just one. They didn't have 10. They had one. How'd that work out? Not so good. Okay? Rules don't work out. Love works out. I do what I do. I hope you do what you do because I love God. Not because it's rule number 3 on the list. You know what? Rule 3 on the list I'm going to break. I'm going to also break rule 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 because it's a rule I'm going to break it. That's because I'm human. Sorry, I am. But if it becomes a matter of, am I loving God the way I'm supposed to? Is what I'm about to do going to hurt Jesus? Well, that's a whole different thing to keep in rule number 3. So, we don't have rules. We have love. And that's what Paul's talking about. And by the way, this whole legalism thing can kill an otherwise good church. Just absolutely destroys churches. All right, verses 9 through 13. What does matter? All right? Let's see what he says matters. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in the idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall a weak brother perish, for whom Christ died. But when you thus sin against the brethren, did you get that? I'm sinning against my brother when I do this, and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Oops, that's not something I want to do. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So, verse 9, he says, beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block. So those Christians in Corinth who felt they had this superior knowledge, they've got to live it. They understand it's okay to eat this meat. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's going to cause a brother to stumble. That's wrong. And making the brother stumble is what's wrong. Now, again, it uses the term weak. Those who are weak. Why is the brother who will not eat the meat sacrificed to an idol considered weak? Many Christians would consider that one to be the stronger Christian. However, Paul is not speaking about being weak or strong in regard to self-control, but in regard to knowledge. To influence the weaker brother to go against his conscience and thereby wound their weak conscience is actually to sin against Jesus. And I don't want to do that. The Corinthian Christians who abused their liberty might have thought it was a small matter. They didn't understand that they were actually offending Jesus. Remember, whatever you do to a brother, you do to Jesus. All right. Verse 10, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge, eating in the idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? They know it's wrong. It's been wired into them that it's wrong. They see you doing it. Well, you go to church, you know what's going on. Maybe it's okay and they try it and their conscience is offended and they're so upset they stop going to church. That's what he's talking about. Now, let me try to put this in today's perspective. We haven't got meat markets that we're worried about. We haven't got all this stuff going on. So let me try to give you a real world scenario. Two couples go out to dinner together. They're both Christian couples. One couple believes that drinking is okay, that it's not forbidden. The other couple believes, oh no, that's taboo. Can't do that. So the couple who knows it's okay to drink, there'll be nothing wrong with them having a drink. Doesn't offend their conscience, they're okay with it. But what are they doing to the other couple? If that becomes a stumbling block, it causes the other couple to think less of them, less of the church, less of Jesus, it's wrong. So this couple who knows drinking is okay doesn't have a drink that night. They'll do it some other time, for the sake of the conscience of the couple they're going out to dinner with. That's real world. Folks, we've got to be sensitive. Now, remember, I don't have a list of do's and don'ts here. But folks who are from a church with a list of do's and don'ts. Don't do stuff that's on their list when you're with them. Be sensitive. Be loving. Be kind. Don't cause them to stumble. Okay, that's the deal. We don't want to cause anybody to stumble. So, to those of you on the internet, thank you for joining us today. Open Door Bible Church in West Oswego, New Hampshire, right next to the post office. If you think this is good online, come and be with us in person. God bless you.